there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking and it is great to have you back. We've been away for, I think, 3 weeks now, so we've got a lot to get through. Really looking forward to bring you up to date with all the Aussie news, the world news and everything else. Just a couple of changes tonight. We're a little bit light on for our usual host, so I've got a special treat for this episode. And it's one of our regulars, the one and only Mike Altamura. How are you, Mike?
Yeah, pleasure. I feel relaxed because I know it's just with you. So there's no Grant Tazzy Brown trying to execute me at every moment. Even though he's a good friend of mine and respectful, he brings a different kind of energy. So I'm looking forward to going through the latest and greatest in Australia and abroad with you.
No, it's great to have you on board, mate. And Tazzy does have that tendency to put people on edge, but we look forward to having him back soon. He's on a little bit of a break at the moment. He had a show a couple of weeks ago and apparently it was a great success, so good on him for that. And Peter Maniatis is overseas at the moment. But, mate, I'm really looking forward to getting your spin on the news at the moment. Obviously, it's always the three of us that are always talking about, so really, as I said, keen to get your view. You're obviously, you got your ear to the ground on the world scene at the moment. Before we actually get into everything, what have you been up to? I know you're home for a few more weeks, and then you're off again, and what's going on with some of your fighters at the moment?
Yes, I should be home for anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. You know, it is in the industry, Lyndon. I could tell you that, and then I get called to travel to the other side of the world in a few days and disappear for 3 months. So that's kind of the way it is. But yeah, I was away for a few months, mainly in Africa, just working on some of Probellum's expansion plans in the region. And so for example, in Kenya, taking meetings with the Kenyan government, working with the sports ministry on some potential projects. So we've got to wait some things out, but it's looking good potentially to launch there in 2023, 5 shows a year. We've got good things happening in Uganda with the Ugandan Boxing Federation. We're trying to build a few different projects in Tanzania. So just staying across those things. And then we've got a few other really exciting announcements around the corner in Africa too. Of course, we launched in Ghana last December, and we got Alfred Lamptey we signed, who's a really good prospect. He's the reigning Ghanaian Fighter of the Year. So when you think of that honour, given that there's guys like Richard Comey, Isaac Dogbe, and he secured that recognition, it shows the kind of raps that are on the kid. And the kid's now 12-0. He's only 20 years of age, so he's got a huge future. And then after that, I dropped into Dubai, so a couple of our staff are stationed there. And, we've promoted 3 shows so far in Dubai. Not sure if we'll return there before year end, but it's possible. But it's always been a great boxing hub. So just did that. Now back home for a bit, like you said, and just keeping my head down. Been laying low recently. Sometimes in the sport, you need to be a bit more, I suppose, a bit more vocal and be proactive on pushing and promoting things. Last couple of months, I just kept my head down and just focusing on bigger picture projects for us. But just because I've been a little quieter doesn't mean I'm not working. In terms of the fighters that I oversee, I guess the one within Australia that I can say we've got something lined up is we're looking to bring Jack Bowen back on July 22nd. So he's 6-0 now. Should go 7-0 there, and then we're in talks for some other fights. But at a minimum, if a couple of the exciting fights we're chasing within Australia don't materialise, I'm going to get him a hit out in the UK in August. So look for that news. And just looking for some good opportunities for some of the other boys at the moment, including Mateo Tapia. He's set to go into the next WBA rankings next month. I think he's a very exciting prospect at super middleweight. Also at super middleweight, I got Rowan Murdoch coming back, likely in August, just locking in an opponent before that date's announced. So, yeah, good things on the horizon.
Sounds good, mate. And also another really good young kid is Jason Malia. So got a lot of raps on him as well. I've had a bit to do with him as an amateur, and he's got all the talent in the world, this kid, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. He's now 3-0. His first 2 pro fights, he's 3-0 with 1 knockout, but his first 2 pro fights, you couldn't fight many guys that are going to be tougher. I'm not saying in terms of skill or that, but he was in with just 2 war horses, the second one especially, Jaden Riddle. So the last one was just a little bit lighter, scored his first knockout as a pro, didn't take any damagement or punishment in the fight. But one thing a lot of people don't know is he's just been waiting his time for a surgery. So
Okay.
think most likely he's going to go into surgery early next month, just waiting on the date so far. And once he does that, then get him back to full health and look to probably target 2 to 3 more fights before year end. But he's a fun prospect, really fun welterweight kid. He was, as you know, a stalwart on the Australian national team for about 10 years, pretty much from when he was 18 years of age. And yeah, it's exciting to have him now in the professional ranks.
Good stuff, mate. Yeah, well, there's so much going on in Aussie boxing at the moment. Obviously, I've just got back from the International Boxing Hall of Fame, which was great. And I didn't realise actually getting back so much that actually happened in Australian boxing. We're going to try and all cram it the whole lot into this episode, mate. Before we move on, just with the International Boxing Hall of Fame, you've obviously been there as well. I did a video just trying to explain to people out there what it actually entails. You've been there. What were your thoughts about it?
It just reiterates to you why you fell in love with the sport and why you continue to be obsessed with the sport, because it's especially, I think, when you work behind the scenes, you can become a little bit jaded at times. But when you go to somewhere like the Hall of Fame, it's literally a kid in a candy store. I mean, even you went Hall of Fame weekend, and this was a trilogy weekend, so you were truly spoiled.
Yeah, I was.
But even if you and you get to meet all the ex-champions and everything, it's an outstanding experience and something I'd recommend that everybody that's a fan of the sport does at least once in their lifetime. But even if you just travel to the Hall of Fame on a non-weekend and just intake all the memorabilia, and then you look at who's on the walls, and then you go and do your research, it inspires you as to what the barometer of greatness is in the sport, especially, say, coming from Australia and you see somebody like Johnny Lewis, a trainer who's been able to impact and leave his mark on the sport all the way to the highest accolade. And then you've got, yourself, you've got, robes belonging to fighters from the 1940s. You've got gloves from the 1920s. You've got, you would have seen the massive computer, the first ever CompuBox machine that Bob Canobio used to record all the stats with. And like I was telling you offline, that there's the main hall. For people that don't know, there's the main hall, which has all the plaques of all the inductees and some priceless memorabilia from great champions. Then you got the secondary room where you got which is more like the shed, right? Which is the old ring from Madison Square Garden, and so many great little trinkets of boxing history. But apparently downstairs, there's like thousands of items they've received, like a lot of scrapbooks and old magazines and old newspapers and things of that nature. And right now, the Brophy family, who are, of course, the ones who oversee the function of the Hall of Fame, they're trying to raise another $5 million for an expansion plan. So in essence, if they do that, they'll be able to house everything out there in the open. And I really think it's something that the industry needs to get behind because, long after, say, Ed Brophy, who's one of the co-founders of the Hall of Fame, is gone, this place is going to leave its mark on the sport 400, 500, 600 years from now. And the more we preserve the history, the better it is for everybody. Like we can sit here and talk about, say, Harry Greb, since I know you love when I mention Harry Greb, one of the all-time greats, but there's very limited footage of Harry Greb. You're going off newspaper reports and things of that nature. We're in an era now where literally we can preserve everything. We can preserve all the fights. We can preserve training footage. We can have the foresight to, a ring robe, gloves, trunks from major fights. And we might not know their value now, but people in 4, 5, 6 generations are going to be like, wow, that was Tyson Fury's robe from when he fought Deontay Wilder. That was Floyd Mayweather's gloves against Manny Pacquiao, things of that nature. And I think when you've got a real purist edge of the sport, and even if you don't, it's just an education being out there. So like I said, I recommend at least once in everybody's lifetime to make the trip. And you know yourself, I mean, look, it stacks up what you spend to get there and everything, but it really is an inexpensive experience from a fan's perspective to be able to fly in. You literally pay your accommodation, pay for the banquets and things like that, and you can mingle with 20, 30, 40 of the greatest fighters of all time.
Yeah, and the thing is too that I notice as well is that they're so accessible. They're right there. The museum,
Yeah.
for example, costs $10 to go in. By the way, there's a motel straight across the road. It's very affordable. That's what struck me is that all the fighters, and not just the fighters, there was promoters there was managers. There's just the amount of people you run into, and I think I said also that I think it's something for the real hardcore boxing fans. Not necessarily sure just the average Joe Blow who might go to the fight to the Rhino or whatever. Not so sure it's for them. But if you love boxing as much as obviously we do and a lot of people out there do, really put it on your bucket list. Because I actually visited there with my family 8 years ago just to go check it out. And I remember saying to my wife, Tara, when I saw it, I've got to come back for an induction weekend. It took me 8 years to get there, but what a weekend to actually come back, of course, because it was 3 years in one. And the fighters there with Floyd Mayweather, Roy Jones, Bernard Hopkins, James Toney, Miguel Cotto, you name it, Shane Mosley, Marquez, they're all there. So it was just unbelievable experience. And not just the men, there was also, I think this is the first induction for the females. So there was Layla Ali, there was Holly Holm, there was
Christy Martin.
Christy Martin, who was obviously the pioneer of all these things. So I just thought it was unbelievable. And to be able to get up so close to them and, photos, autographs, and just to hear them talk, it was unbelievable. But, mate, we've got to move on. We've got a big show to get through. And if you want any more information on that, but feel free to chuck us a DM or whatever they call it these days, and happy to answer any questions you might have. But, mate, let's get on to some Aussie news at the moment. And there is so much going on. As I said at the start, we're going to try and cram it all in. The first one I suppose we'll discuss is probably I suppose it's the biggest news, and that is Charlo has been mandated to fight Tszyu for the WBO junior middleweight or super welterweight title. This is just massive news for Aussie boxing to have the second Aussie in 12 months fight for the undisputed world title.
Yeah, huge opportunity. I know there's been talk out there. There was Eddie Hearn the other week said that he felt it's come too early for Tszyu. But you're in a catch-22.
Is there such a thing as too early, or you just got to take it while the opportunity's there?
Oh, look, there is such a thing. I mean, Marvis Fraser fighting Larry Holmes when he did. Yeah. Scott Frank fighting Larry Holmes when he did, if we're going that era. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, it's a catch-22 because everyone pays sanction fees and positions their fighters and steps up the opportunity to get in line for these kind of calls. And you can't pick and choose. I try to say to people all the time, boxing really is the luck of the draw. And you can't be, I'll give you an example. Tszyu stopped Jeff Horn. Mm-hmm. He stopped Dennis Hogan. Dennis Hogan, 2 fights earlier, lost a disputed decision to Jaime Munguia for the world title. Mm-hmm. So Tszyu realistically, if things went a little bit different, could have fought a Dennis Hogan for the world title. Patrick Teixeira, who then won the vacant title, very, very beatable guy, but Teixeira had the mandatory Castano. Castano, a whole different animal, probably suited Tim a little better. Castano draws with Charlo, loses to Charlo. The thing is, end of the day, you got to back your charge. What are you going to do? You build to that point, and then it's like, oh, well, this is a rough fight. And you backpedal. If you backpedal, you're going to drain all of the athlete's confidence. And the thing is, there's no expectation. It's similar to George Kambosos with Teofimo Lopez. You had all that talk of, why does boxing need this fight? There's better fights out there. He's going to get outgunned. That's why they fight the fights. I watched the club show on the weekend where a kid 8-0 with 7 knockouts got flattened by a guy 3-12 who had been knocked out 12 times. That's why they fight the fights, and where I respect Tszyu is he knows this is a massive challenge. I've heard people say that, Tszyu's defense is leaky and this and that and whatever. You don't think he doesn't realize he can't plot in and be a little pedestrian like he's been in some of his prior fights, like he was the first round against Gaucher? I think people take the Gaucher fight as his American debut, and I know the campus said he was unwell going into it, but throw away all that discussion. What I saw after the first couple of rounds, once he settled in, was a kid that was taking risks and producing a high work rate and looking to take Gaucher to places he had never been in his career, fighting Erislandy Lara and Austin Trout, Erickson Lubin, some of the best fighters in the world. So Tim has to be confident going into Charlo. If you look at the CompuBox history, Charlo's got a history of a very low punch output. Tim's got to make his punches count. There's a pathway to victory. The pathway to victory is to outwork Charlo. The scary part is Charlo has the kind of explosiveness that one or two punches, one left hook, one right hand, could change the fight. So Tim's going to be aware of that. He's going to go in, make the adjustments. But I got no issue with his team taking this opportunity, because that's why you get in boxing. You turn professional, you hunt down these opportunities, you pay the sanction fees so that when it's your opportunity to step up and fight the best in the world, you fight the best in the world. And you know what, looking at it from like a worst case scenario, Tim goes up there, gives a game effort, gets beaten. Charlo's probably going to move to 160 within 6 months. Tim comes back, beats a rated fighter, and he's probably back in the top 5 or 6 in the world anyway. So, you know, worse things could happen.
Yeah, so we're still awaiting the date and venue, of course. I think they had up to the 20th, but from what I hear, they're trying to see where it fits in with a lot of other big fights obviously happening around that time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'll just play a quick video of George Rose, Tim's promoter, and this is a little bit of an update on what they're thinking at the moment.
In discussions with PBC, and obviously him being the undisputed champion, all the cards are in their favour. But as I said, they've been really good to work with, and where we're at the moment is we're pushing for an Australia or US location. We'd love it in Australia. Obviously, they want the US location, and if it is in the US, we'll be pushing for LA or Las Vegas. And I think the likely timing of it will be around October, November.
Yeah, so I know he was just saying about Australia there, Mike, but there's probably zero chance it happens in Australia, is it? It's going to happen in the US.
No chance it's coming to Australia. Zero. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to note as well is, so when there's unified champions, the sanctioning bodies work on a what's it called? They work on like a rotating basis. So in terms of, what's the longest overdue mandatory, and then it rotates between the sanctioning bodies. Yeah. As far as I can understand, even though the WBO has ordered this contest, the next fight in the rotation is actually the IBF mandatory, which is a Russian opponent. Yeah. Now, that opponent's also signed to PBC, so PBC might get them to step aside again. Charlo might just decide to vacate that belt, or he might decide to take that obligation. So that's one of the sticking points at the moment too.
Yeah, look, if you look at all the opponents, apart from probably Fundora might have been the other one they might have been looking at, but really, if you're Charlo's camp as far as the appeal of this, of a defence, the Russian really doesn't come into calculation, does it? Tim makes all the sense in the world, doesn't he, at this stage?
Tim's probably the most interesting fight, like you said, Tim and Fundora. But Fundora they can handle even later. Like I said, he's a PBC in-house fighter, but also his mandatory status come after Tim's. So in the rotation, it would be Tim prior to Fundora.
All right, yeah, so we'll await the date and venue for that. As we said, it's obviously going to be the US, most likely maybe LA or Vegas, you would probably think, and late October, early November, I think. And I think even George saying there that Charlo holds all the cards, I think that's the give that, we're at his beck and call, basically, aren't we? And look, I think I don't think that'll worry me. I think Tim, he'll fight him anywhere to get his opportunity. So it should be great, mate. Let's move on to the other big news, and that's that George Kambosos has enacted his rematch clause with Devin Haney. Probably not a big surprise, I gather, is it? It was always going to happen.
Well, what else are you going to do? What else are you going to do? The reason you put these clauses in contracts is to enact them. It's not like if George got flattened in 1 or 2 rounds and it was a bad knockout, then you maybe have the conversation where you decide to take 1 or 2 softer fights back before hunting a rematch. But in this situation, he got outboxed for 12 rounds. I don't think he was particularly hurt at too many stages in the fight. I think he took a few shots that caught his attention, but I don't think he was really hurt. He's going to try and make some adjustments. Is it the most interesting fight from a boxing fan's perspective? Hell no. I know boxing fans yearning to see Haney against maybe Gervonta Davis, maybe against Lomachenko, a different kind of challenge, but George earned the right. Haney signed the contract. What else is Kambosos supposed to do? Is he supposed to come back and have 2 or 3 build-back fights? Like, to me, anyways, just looking at it from a fighter's mindset, you know better than me, Lyndon, because you were one of Australia's best as an amateur. Like, when you were the best in your division, but pound for pound, you're one of Australia's best at that time. But
thanks, mate.
as an athlete, if you lose a decision and you feel in your heart you can better that, what drains you more? Not taking the fight, being talked out of taking the fight, and then not knowing for 3 years, or daring to be great again? I mean, even if it's a repeat of the first result, I think then at least George has peace in his mind that Haney's just a better man.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree, mate. And look, I think, I can't believe people would actually say that he might not take the fight. Of course he's going to take it. Obviously, these people haven't probably been fighters themselves. And like you said, the fire that burns in any fighter, no matter what level they are, worth the salt. And of course he's going to take the rematch. And if he does lose, well, at least he can accept that. He's always going to be, even if he loses the rematch, he's always going to be a target for the up-and-comers and other contenders out there. He's still a big name, so he's going to have some big fights going forward. And of course he's going to take it. Mike, the one thing I was actually going to ask you about, and I did comment on my review of the fight that's on YouTube at the moment, if you want to check it out, is that I did comment that maybe he might have considered allowing the fight to be in the States. Now, I know that sounds stupid off the top, because why give up the home ground advantage? But do you think that in the first fight, the amount of pressure that he heaped upon himself with his supporters and the pressure of the Australian public on him, do you think that would actually relieve a little of the pressure by actually going to America? Or do you think take it at home if the chance is there?
Look, I mean, sometimes those adjustments work. If you remember, even though it wasn't a rematch, but it was coming off a loss, Zab Judah, after he lost to Carlos Baldomir, fought Floyd Mayweather and refused to do any of the press tour. He just went into camp and focused. And even though he lost that fight, first 4 to 6 rounds, you could see it was a different version of Judah from the previous fight. Yeah, I do think, like, George has always handled pressure pretty well. But still, there's nothing like, headlining a stadium fight, being involved on the promotion of the event, needing to worry about having fighters under your own representation on the undercard. You got everyone talking about, interviews, tickets. The list goes on, and you've got to be obligated to do all those things to build the event, especially when you're the promoter. Think that, fighting Haney in the States would maybe alleviate some of those pressures, but I also think that, George's team will back themselves. If they can secure the funding, they'll back themselves to do it in Australia again.
Yeah, now, you obviously know the Australian boxing scene inside out, the Melbourne scene better than anything. Do they do it in Melbourne, or do you take it to maybe Sydney? It's just my opinion is that maybe they should get it out of Melbourne, because there's no way in hell they're getting anywhere near 40,000 again. Melbourne sports fans will support anything. They'll come out in droves. But to back it up, it's always a bit of a challenge. I would think maybe they're going to have it in Australia. My opinion was maybe to take it to Sydney or even Brisbane or whatever. What are your thoughts?
I would go to Sydney, and I'd go a smaller venue.
Yeah, maybe 15,000 or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, the good part about Sydney is they've got all those rugby stadiums, which are easier to kind of dress down for this kind of event. I think any kind of AFL stadium looks half empty even when it's full for non-purpose events, unless it's Aussie rules football or anything of that nature, a concert where you can occupy every space. I think for things of this nature, even like you said, you got 40,000 in there, but it still doesn't have the atmosphere of a 40,000 seat crowd. So I think you go Sydney. I think they adjust the kind of stadium. Think that they've got to hit up, I couldn't see the Melbourne or the Victorian government, doubling down. They would want to do all the assessments, look at the numbers, whereas I think that you could procure fresh interest from somewhere like the New South Wales government.
Yeah, and I think also commented as well that I think what a lot of fans out there don't realise, if they're not from Victoria, is how big AFL grounds are. And the Etihad Marvel Stadium it is now, and I think I commented before the fight, I was a bit worried that the whole thing might fall a little bit flat, because the ground compared to a rugby ground is almost twice as long, the stands, and that's what was great about the Horn-Pacquiao fight, is that they did it in a rugby league stadium, and even though it was about the same, or was 50,000 at that one, it seemed a lot more intimate because you were a lot more on top of it. So I'm with you. I think maybe take it to a rugby ground in Sydney, because I think in Melbourne, mate, I don't know about what you think. I think they'd 15,000, maybe 20,000. That's probably the most I think they would expect, because Melbourne people are almost, Victorian people are almost like, been there, done that, give it a spell, and we'll move on to the next big event. I know Rugby League tried it many years ago. They had the first ever State of Origin in Melbourne. 92,000 people turned up, and the next year it just fell flat. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I think it's hard to sell the spectacle twice.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you
Especially
resell that?
Yeah, it's not like the Melbourne Cup or the Grand Prix or the Australian Opens every year, and people sort of revolve around. I think this being so soon, 6 months later, yeah, I don't know. It's just my opinion as well. I'm with you, mate. Go take it to Sydney, or even, as I said, take it over to the States. But we're going to get onto our first talking point, and actually relates to this fight. And this is obviously the big question: can George Kambosos win the rematch?
He's got to believe he can,
Which he will.
but I just think Haney's got his number. I think Haney's skills and boxing IQ and ways to draw George into his game plan. George is going to adjust, no doubt. But I think even if George adjusts, I think Haney's going to have the answers. Haney's really fast, really long. And the hard part with George is I can't see any equation where Haney doesn't have the rhythm, the range, the distance, the footwork to not be able to negate and control him from the outside. And George is one of those fighters that thrives when he can draw you into his traps and get you to chase him. So I just think that, George has probably got an advantage on Haney fighting on the inside, but he's definitely got an advantage fighting on the inside, but get into the inside frequently enough, I just can't see it happening. I want to be wrong, but I just think Haney, it might be a bit more competitive, but I just think Haney probably outboxes him comfortably again.
Yeah, I'm with you, mate. Look, I think George is almost, I don't know, the best way to describe him is he's an aggressive counter-puncher, isn't he? He's not really one that'll initiate. He'll put it on you, but he likes to counter. And where Haney, on the other hand, he won't go first. He's very patient. He'll wait for you to lead first, and he just countered George all night long. Now, no doubt, George will improve. Maybe they'll bring in some help as far as some maybe international trainers or whatever. And don't forget, he did not have Mick Ackaway in this fight either. There's obviously all those things that happened on that front. So maybe that was a little bit unsettled because he was obviously there for the Lopez fight. But I just think, even though George will make some adjustments, Haney will as well. And I think the adjustments that Haney will make will supersede George. Now, this is not us obviously bagging the Aussie out. This is what I always say to people. It's not us, going against the Aussie. It's just stating our opinion. I'm with you. I think it'll be another dullish fight. I think George will try and put it on him. But I just think no matter what he does, Haney will just be one step ahead of him and just win another probably dull unanimous decision. But let's hope we're wrong, mate, because it'd be great to have him back, especially if Tszyu wins. We could have two undisputed world champions, which would just be unbelievable for Australia.
It'd be an unprecedented era. The last time we were closest to that were when Famo and Lionel Rose at bantamweight, Johnny Famage at featherweight were both the recognised world champions. That's really the closest we've ever been.
Yeah, so anyway, we'll see what happens there. I think there's no date or venue that will obviously mention yet, but we'll obviously advise you when it is. Let's get on to another big show happening, mate. This has almost been forgotten in the mix of everything, I will say. It's obviously Marius, if I hope I pronounced that right, correct me, Marius Briedis against Jai Opetai next week on the Gold Coast for the IBF Cruiserweight title. As I said, mate, this thing's, with everything going on with Kambosos and Tszyu and Nikita Tszyu and everything else, this fight's almost been forgotten, but it's a massive fight for Australian boxing, isn't it?
Massive opportunity. Briedis would be in the top 5 fighters to come to Australia probably in the last 5 to 10 years, really. When you look at what he's accomplished, you look at his resume and what he's achieved as an athlete. I'm a big believer in Jai Opetai. No doubt he's the underdog in this fight. I believe it. Did you promote one of his fights?
I did, yeah.
Right?
When he
was against Frankie Lopez.
One round. It was Virgil Hill's fight. What was his name?
It was Frankie Lopez, I'm sure.
That's him, yeah. Lasted
and the thing is, I mean, that would have reflected to you, like, everyone talks about Jai's boxing IQ and skills and everything, but he can punch a little bit too. He's not just a counter puncher that thrives on outpointing you. He hits hard enough to keep guys on the outside and have their respect. And he's going to have to catch Briedis with some heavy shots in this fight to deter him, keep him turning. I've actually had Floyd Masson's been sparring Briedis this week, who
Okay.
I managed. Floyd he's a cruiserweight southpaw, and I know he's done a lot of work in the past with Jai, and he's adamant that Jai's going to win the fight based on his perception of Briedis sparring. I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to sell out their personal intel from camp or anything of that nature, but he's confident. I mean, I look at this fight and I think Briedis is an outstanding champion. It's hard to pick against a guy whose only career loss is a 7-5 defeat to Alexander Usyk. So he went tighter with Usyk than Anthony Joshua did at heavyweight. But that said, like I told you, I'm a big believer in Jai. I think he's got all the capabilities to pull off an upset. And I've said it from day one when I sat there and watched this kid at 2011 Olympics fight a 6'7" Azerbaijani who was ranked number 2 in the world and pushed him to like a split decision at 17 years of age. I said it from back then. This is a guy that when his time comes, he's going to believe in himself and he's going to step up. So I've got to back myself on that. I'm rolling with the Australian on this fight. It's not just, of course, we all got national pride, but it's not just a national pride thing. I just really think Jai has the ability to step up. I just hope he can keep away from Briedis' right hand.
Yeah, look, and you're right, mate. He can box, he can punch. He's got all the tools, hasn't he, Jai Opetai? And just for the Aussie fans out there that are maybe unfamiliar with Briedis, just tell us a little bit about his style, about his little bit of his background. Just fill us in a little bit, just for the fans out there that aren't too familiar with him.
Well, I'll give a few things which won't necessarily be easily found on Google. You know, because they record everything, you can go look him up in that respect. But Briedis is from Latvia. He's actually kickboxing background. From memory, didn't have any boxing background at all, like any amateur boxing background. And he was in a bunch of tournaments, so he's got about 12 wins on his record that aren't recognised. So you won't see him on his record, but they're pro fights. He fought in unsanctioned shows, the Big is Better, which used to go on Eurosport. And he won like 4 consecutive tournaments. So they were similar to like K1, 8 men, 1 night heavyweight tournaments. And in those tournaments, he beat some really solid fighters. He beat, guys that were like, 15-5 and guys that had 150 amateur fights. Evgeny Orlov he beat, who was, like a tough heavyweight journeyman. And that got him on the radar to turn pro. He turned professional at cruiserweight, he's struggling to secure fights. At late notice, stepped up to fight Manuel Charlo, who's, of course, the current WBA heavyweight champion of recess. And against the odds, he flattened Manuel Charlo and then went on a tear from there, won the WBC silver title, parlayed it all the way to winning a world championship. And like I said, he pushed Alexander Usyk to the absolute maximum in the WBSS, the World Boxing Super Series. And really, if you look at the top-tier cruiserweights of the last 10 years, outside of Usyk, he's right in the mix with everybody in terms of what he's achieved. So that's why I said here, he's legit, probably one of the top 5 most accomplished fighters to come to Australia in the last 10 years. But he's, 36 years of age now, I think.
I think so,
yeah. Jai might be just catching him at the right time, coming off a layoff, 36 years of age, high-pressure fighter, similar to a lot of the guys' kickboxing background, very upright, good straight right hand, good hook, jabs, but doesn't jab like your typical flicking, touching jab, throws a heavy jab. Mostly when he jabs, there'll be it's like a stunted jab. He throw a jab and then back up with a right hand or like a double jab stiff. He's not a real fluid puncher. He's not a guy that's going to throw double jab, right hand, left hook to the head, left to the body. He's not a fluid combination puncher. So I think the key with him is keeping him off of those straight lines. If Jai can keep turning him, it's going to be a hard night for Briedis. I think Jai's got the tools, but he's a murderous puncher, is Briedis. So he's just got to stay out of the way.
So ripper fights on that as well. You can see there that Isaac Harmon's making his return. You would obviously expect him to win that one. But Dana Coolwell, great young talent. Young Taylor Robinson, I think, is fighting for a youth world title. I really like this fight. Faris Chevalier against Connor Wallace. The rematch, Joel Camilleri, Kozan Mazudia. And you can see there the Kiwi guy. Is that, what's his name down below?
David Nyika.
Nyika. shows everything as well. The young Akuso as well has got the goods, and even Zalewski and Mishra should be a good fight. So, if you know it's a main event fight, I don't know about yourself, but I no problems at all paying $60 for this card because this is a ripper.
Look, the main event on its own, it's a hell of a fight. I know people always complain about the fact that the industry out here and how it needs to work and what changes we need to make and how they charging $59.95 for this. And the reality is, with how small the sport is here, we need to charge $59.95 for these kind of cards to make it feasible. Like we're not getting the support from the networks. Australia, this is what the fans need to realise because they might not understand. So Fox Sports has raised the budgets comparative to how it used to be. Fox Sports back in the day were paying $17,000 and would provide maybe the lighting and pay the MC, and you were accountable for everything else. Production, lighting, MC, they would cover. You can't. Come on, 17 grand. You can't do anything.
No.
You can't do anything. Then you've got to raise the standard of the fights you put. So it's changed in recent years to about 120,000. Someone like Briedis, 120,000. Where are you going to be able to marry up that 120 with sponsors and tickets and make it feasible? The only way is the outlet of rolling on main event. And even still, you're taking a chance. Is there, you look at 120,000 is what, 2,000, then double that because it's a 50-50 split with the network. So they have to do 4,000 buys on this to make that money.
And I think
what I'm saying? Like to make it's tough.
It is, and I think also what a lot of people don't realise that they always say, "Oh, we're paying $60 for an Australian card, but we only pay $30 or $40 for an international card." I suppose what they don't realise that when the Australian cards like this one are on, this is what the promotion's relying on is the Australian market to fund the card. When we have the American fights, we're just an afterthought. Yeah, we'll charge them $30. Is really whether we get 10,000 buys or no buys. It makes pretty much no difference to the overall promotion. Where in Australia, this is the money that's funding the show, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is how we can try and build in the market. As for if you don't want to pay it, just don't pay it. Don't buy it. Yeah. I've always said it. Like I remember years ago there was a pay-per-view card. And trust me, there wasn't one fight as interesting as the first prelim on this card on it. But, the main event was Solomon Hormono versus Cliff Cowser. The acclaimed half-brother of Mike Tyson, who isn't actually related to him, who was like 26 wins and 10 losses. And everybody was complaining at the time, oh, how can they charge? I think it was $39.95, whatever. It was like simple, like I'm going to pay it because I'm a boxing tragic. But you have a choice. No one's holding a gun to your head and forcing you to buy it. And if you don't buy it, so if you don't want to support this card, don't support it. Maybe then the message will go through in time that these kind of cards can't flourish on pay-per-view. And we're going to have to rely on maybe Fox Sports investing more in the sport on events that run on Fox Sports or other networks, not just Fox Sports, but say Channel 9, whoever. But the way the system is now, we need the support on main event out here. I can understand the way it works, but like I told you, a lot of people just kind of, I understand why they're frustrated, but you've got a choice at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you're right. And look, the good thing about it at the moment is there's so much going on with promoters and Fox. Everyone's living up to their end of the bargain. They're investing in it, but the promoters are putting on great shows. And I mean, it's we've commented numerous times in the last few months about how Australian boxing's probably never been more vibrant. Not saying the fighters are better than yesteryear, but the opportunities and the platform they're all getting these days, I don't think it's ever been, you can maybe tell me the difference. I've never seen it ever in my lifetime anyway.
Look, the visibility is a lot greater now. You just said it. The depth of fighters isn't what it's been at previous times in the past, but the visibility of the sport. The fact that even we've got the expansion of potentially Matchroom and DAZN into Australia. Yep. On our side with Pro Ballum, we're doing different things, keeping guys active, trying to build them to outside audiences. Obviously, on Fox Sports, there's regular cards, there's events like this. There's other promoters that even if they don't have a TV deal, they're pushing live streaming everything. We had the Stan Sport card with Sonny Bill Williams and Barry Hall, which did great numbers. So now Stan Sports looking to up their game. Like, we've never had these kind of opportunities before. In the past, it was like, you remember the days of Sky Sports? It was either on Sky or there was nothing.
For us, yep.
And even Sky couldn't be purchased in the household. So there was no fights on commercial TV or anything. Even dial back to the 80s, like people will talk about Jeff Fennick was on, say Channel 9, Lester was on, say ABC a few times, Channel 7 and that. But they were one-off shows. We were getting 7, 8 cards of live boxing on TV a year. Now we're getting probably 25 to 30. So really the visibility is as good as it has ever been. And yeah, hopefully we start to see more talent flourish, a few more fighters at least raise their game, be able to win world championships, and the sport will continue to grow.
And who knows, like, before we move on, who knows, like, you've got Angelo DiCarlo with beIN Sports, and like you said, you got Stan. Who knows, it could be a Paramount or a Netflix or whoever that might say, hey, we want a piece of the action as well, and you just don't know. I mean, and obviously DAZN's in there as well. I mean, there's lots of different things coming in. Who knows, there might be more and more avenues to watch boxing and give more promoters an opportunity, which I think is great. Let's move on, mate, because next week, it's a big card, No Limit on Fox. It's Liam Wilson, Matthias Rueda, have I pronounced that right? But what should be a massive card. What are your thoughts on that? Is it a big step for Wilson? This Rueda's only had one loss, and that was a couple of years ago in a world title fight. What do you know about him?
Yeah, I was ringside at that fight.
Oh, were you?
It was against Oscar. Yeah, it was against Oscar Valdez on the Terence Crawford Victor Postel undercard.
So what are your thoughts?
Valdez ruined Rueda. Couldn't miss him. I think Rueda. Don't get me wrong, it's a tough fight. Anyone with 30-plus knockouts can punch, unless you're Ernesto Espano, who just fought Mikhailovich. So, he couldn't punch much at all for 30-plus knockouts. But Rueda can crack a bit. He's very. I'm not going to say raw because he's been professional a long time, but he's what's a word for it? I mean, he's wild. I guess he's wild. He's unconventional. Yeah, roughhousing, wild, sprays his punches a bit, but he can crack. I think Liam Wilson has had a tendency to be a little too flat-footed and hold his feet and not use the best of his capabilities. If Liam Wilson boxes him, stays focused, picks his shots, I can see him stopping Rueda in the mid-rounds. I just think that he's just too easy to hit and too open to hit down the center. He'll throw an overhand right and square up, which, Liam Wilson's got a really nice left uppercut when he's southpaw. I could see Liam walking him onto those shots. I think Liam's physicality and punching power could be his undoing, but he's just got to be cautious early with Rueda. He telegraphs his punches, wings them from everywhere, doesn't have a great punch retraction. So, he'll throw and there's opportunity to counter him with 2-3 shots. So Liam's just got to be patient. It's a good step. Rueda's a world-rated fighter, but it's the right guy to pick in those world rankings for Wilson.
All right. Speaking of Wilson, let's hear a little bit of what he had to say about the fight.
And to be able to do it for myself now and build my name through the sport that I love and through my home state, it feels a very big privilege. And I got to thank my promoters for getting behind me and making this all possible. Yeah, it's good. The crowd is my friends, family, supporters, and most importantly, my kids will be able to come support. And I do it for the whole of the Australian public. These good performances, and I want to put on good performances and show you guys that I'm a force to be reckoned with.
Obviously, it was well documented. The loss that you had and the manner in which you came back against Joe Noyne. Just tell us a bit about that process after that loss.
Yeah, I just simply had to go back to the drawing board, be more professional, go back and tidy up a few things in my life and come back and be the ultimate fighter. And I feel like in the preparation for that fight, I really did tidy up a few things and I'm still doing that. And I want to show the improvements I've made and yeah.
So it sounds like he's matured a bit there. You can see Shannon coming on the end there. He's matured a little bit, so hopefully he's learned from the other fight. Because he did actually, before he got stopped, he had the little bit of a habit of maybe, I don't know whether you call it showboating, but he'd stand in close, he'd get in the pocket, he'd stay there, he'd put his hands down, he's shut in the air and almost dare the other, the fighter, the opponent to hit him, and obviously he came unstuck. But you get the impression he's matured a little bit also in the ring, but also outside the ring, because you can remember he liked to actually have a bit to say in the past, and now he just seems a little bit more humble.
Well, sometimes adversity brings you back to reality and reiterates where your focus needs to be. I always said this with Liam in the amateurs, and anyone that's part of his team or surrounding him, hopefully they listen to my full comment here so they don't take offense to the first thing I say. But I always said with Liam, when I watch him as an amateur at times, he had an identity crisis a bit. So he didn't know if he was Canelo, didn't know if he was Gennady Golovkin, didn't know if he was a boxer, if he was a roughhousing puncher. And I think that sometimes when you got these ultra gifted fighters, they can get stuck between trying to, like you said, maybe be a bit too flashy, too flamboyant, rather than sticking to their bread and butter. Like Liam's got really nice skills. He's nice and long. He's sharp. He's not a real fast guy, but there's not a lot of wasted energy on his punches. Digs hard to the body, and I always felt like when he's focused and picks his shots, he's got so much natural power that the stoppages are going to come. You don't have to go out there and try and force it and be winging wild shots or holding his feet too long, because that's going to make him vulnerable on the counter. So I think that, look, the last fight with Noine, it's hard to know what to take out of that, because Noine missed weight and didn't look himself in the belt either. But that said, I think the most important thing that come out of that is it restored Liam Wilson's confidence. And if he sticks to his identity and what we know his capabilities are, he's got every opportunity and all the ability to go a long way.
Yeah, no, definitely, mate. Well, also on that card is Shotgun Shannon O'Connell. She's making a return from shoulder surgery. She's fighting Sarah Higginson, who was beaten by Taylor Robinson on the Kambosos Haney card. So it's obviously a comeback fight for Shannon, but it's good to have her back. She's got big things in her sights. This is what she had to say as well.
Obviously, I've busted myself to be ranked as a bantamweight. So I'm the number one for the IBF. I'm the number one for the WBA. I'd love to fight Ebony, beat her, then unify, and then I'll look at going up and take a Shanika's title just for fun.
I had to laugh at that. I'll go up and take Shanika's title just for fun. I think she just put that little dig in there just obviously get a little bit one up. So I know she wants to fight both of them. But the Ebony Bridges fight, if you're Eddie Hearn, are you letting Ebony Bridges fight Shannon, or are you keeping her away from her?
Depends on what you're targeting for the Australian market. If you're targeting a super fight for the Australian market, not just that, target around the NRL. You got Queensland versus New South Wales.
Yep.
Big rivalry you can build. You could build a whole card around it. I think it'll be one of the most important women's fights in Australian boxing history, undoubtedly.
Probably, yeah,
and Shannon's already been in some of those super fights. She fought Di Prazak in an All-Australian Women's World Title fight, albeit at 130 pounds, WBC World Title. My heart breaks for Shannon a little bit in a way, because we know she's at the tail end of her career. She's still a world-class fighter, but she's at the tail end of her career. And I guess when you look at it and perceive it, lesser accomplished Australian fighters have had easier runs to world titles. So, Ebony Bridges one, Shanika Johnson another. And that's no knock on. Yeah, that's right. But that's no knock on them. You take your opportunities when it's presented to you.
Yep, exactly.
And so I can see why that fire burns within Shannon to want to jump at that chance. Like I remember a few years ago, actually, when I was working with Fatuma Zarika, who at the time was WBC 122-pound world champ. I called Shannon and offered her the fight, and she's like, I just want to let you know I'm pregnant. And I thought at that point, if there was a way, she would have. But I thought at that point maybe she would walk away. Like maybe, having a third child should decide, okay, I've been through this twice before, but her other kids had grown up a little bit. I thought she might have walked away, but full credit to her. She was back in the gym, powering forward. I think now at this stage of her career, though, smarter is better. She's always had a habit, a propensity to overtrain. And when you got those habits, as you get older, you start to pay a price for it. So I think if she just gets back, it'll be good to see how she looks against Higginson. I think it's a perfect kind of comeback opponent. Her first fight under the No Limit umbrella, and also first fight with Glenn Jennings managing her and Gareth Williams and Shara Roma training her. So a lot of changes, right kind of opponent when you're making those changes. And let's hope she can get one of those two Aussies in the ring for a world championship. Like I said, it's about giving the fans the best fights, and both those fights are exciting. I know that the first fight with Shanika, I thought Shannon just edged it. Shanika's team would probably disagree with that. They felt they maybe got a raw deal. Well, let's see who really is the better woman in the ring and work the rematch.
Yeah, either fight will be massive. And I think the one thing I'm actually glad with Shannon, I mean, she's obviously getting on in years as far as a boxer goes, but and you know yourself, I promoted her and managed her for quite a few of her fights as well. But what I'm really rapt about at the moment is finally she's got the management behind her, the promotion company behind her, that I couldn't give her, and others haven't been able to give her either. And that's what I'm rapt about now. She's finally in that stage where she's going to get her opportunities. You know, Glenn Jennings is one of the best in the business. No Limit is dominating Australian boxing at the moment. So I'm just glad that she should have an opportunity. And you're right. How good would it be if Eddie Hearn wanted to do, if this next show's a success, that he comes back and does Ebony versus Shannon in Australia? It would just be huge for Aussie boxing, huge for women's boxing. It'd just be great. And if anyone's going to do it, Eddie's the man. So hopefully that comes about. Speaking of Eddie, mate, let's get on to his foray into the Australian boxing scene. It's a fight that really took me by surprise. It's Liam Paro versus Brock Jarvis. Did you see this coming? You probably knew in advance, of course, but outside of that, would you imagine this fight taking place?
Yeah, Angelo De Carlo asked me what I thought of it about 3 weeks before it got announced. So I definitely said to him, believe it or not, Jarvis is a bigger guy in the fight.
He looked massive, didn't he? He looked huge.
Yeah, but I said that to Angela because I'd seen a few videos with Jarvis online. I was like, he must be like, he looks like he's a light heavyweight.
He does.
So it's an intriguing fight, I think, because there's few intangibles. I mean, Liam Paro's a terrific boxer, really good southpaw skills. He's never had someone that's going to bull rush him and look to out hustle and wrestle and take away his distance from him like a demon possessed like Brock Jarvis will. And Brock Jarvis hasn't fought anyone with the kind of exquisite counter-punching skills and punching accuracy that Liam Paro possesses, and also going to 140. I'm not going to say Brock was a weight bully because I think it's a wrong term at other weights, but you could see that he physically rehydrated higher than opponents. Whereas at this weight, even if he rehydrates higher than Paro, it might not necessarily assist him. He might just be a little bit sluggish. Think that the punches are going to be more telling at 140 than they were at 130, 126. But maybe he was sucking himself dry and maybe his resistance is going to improve. I think it's a great fight because it's a beautiful clash of styles. If you want to know my pick, I think that just back Liam Paro's skills. I think Liam's got the capabilities to stop Jarvis in the latter stages of the fight. But I was surprised how many people I've spoken to in Australian boxing that are thinking the other way, that believe that, you know, Jarvis might be able to overwhelm him and bring consistent pressure, and that Paro's never seen that kind of equation. So, yeah, it's a fascinating fight and the right kind of fight for them to launch in this market with.
Yeah, it's a great fight, and I'm with you. I mean, you talk about the weight with Brock in the past. I mean, I just feel sorry for. I just remember watching the fights with Mark Schliebs and poor little Nort Beauchamp, who were just absolutely just towered over by Brock and just bullied and beat up. So, and they're both, especially Mark Schliebs, good young boxers. But yeah, it's an interesting one, and yeah, I'm with you. I think Brock will bring it. But I think Liam has the movement, the speed, the power. Obviously, he's a natural light welterweight, so it's going to be interesting. Let's see what Eddie has to say. And I've got to say before I put it on, Mike, I think you and I were probably the only ones in Australia last week that didn't get a selfie with Eddie Hearn. Everyone else seemed to
done that 12 years ago.
I know you know him pretty well, but I feel the way, so I didn't get the selfie with Eddie. So next time he's in town, I want my selfie. But here's what he had to say about the upcoming event.
you know, which is difficult for me sitting next to him, I have to be honest with you. But what a fighter, what a talent. You know, you've got Jeff Fenwick here, one of the legends of not just Australian boxing, but world boxing. Great characters involved here in this main event. And it's such an intriguing fight, because I've got to give you a little bit of background to this fight, because I think it's important. You know, the camps know each other very well. Angelo Di Carlo is the godfather, I believe, to Jeff Fenwick's daughter, and vice versa, I believe, you know. But the great thing is, it was almost like a call your bluff moment. You know, I sat down with Angelo and Alfie and I said, I think that Liam Paro against Brock Jarvis is an incredible fight for Australian boxing. And Alfie and Angelo said, look, it's not going to happen because, you know, we're all friends here and almost family. Then I spoke to Jeff Fenwick, and Jeff Fenwick said, yeah, we'll have that fight.
It wasn't like that, guys.
Jeff, let me just tell my version first.
Tell your version.
And Alfie said, no one actually said any of this, but it's a great story. Alfie said, I can't believe they've taken the fight. It's a liberty. We've built ourselves to number one in the world, and this guy wants to come in and try and steal it, steal the thunder. So I'm going to start with Jeff, because I know you'll keep it.
He talks so well, doesn't he? He's got all the personality and profile and that aura about him. I think the Aussie fans are going to love him, aren't they? What he brings to the table, aren't they?
Talk about throwing Jeff Fenwick under the bus.
Before I let you comment, let's hear what Jeff actually had to say.
The Charlo family, I love them. They are my family. And Liam too. We've travelled with Liam and been a part of trying to help him grow with his career on occasions. But this is an opportunity that when I was asked, because I never would have asked for this fight ever, and when they asked me, would Brock take the fight? Of course, I sat down and thought of all the positives and the great things that come out of it. And of course, I said yes. And why did I say yes? It's quite obvious. I think that Brock can win. My opinion is Brock's gone up in weight. And as he's gone up, he's got better. And we've got over 2 months. And Brock's been developing every training session. I think by the time this fight comes, you'll see the best Brock Jarvis you've ever seen.
Liam Paro obviously sitting on the verge now of a world championship shot. Brock moves up, all of a sudden could put himself in that number one position as well. Do you feel like it's almost a shot for nothing again for Brock in this fight? Liam Paro's got everything to defend in that position.
Nothing's for nothing.
I'll just cut it off there. But yeah, you're right. He did throw him under the bus, but he's just got that personality about him. People are just drawn to him, aren't they, Eddie Hearn?
Yeah, I think that the challenge he's going to have in this market is that, you know, he's going to, and you just noted it before, literally everybody in the sport out here had a selfie with him last week. But what comes after that is a lot of division. When people don't get on the show or that, people start to be counterproductive to the cause. And that's where Eddie's going to need good partners, and he probably needs to rely on and build a lot of his branch out here with somebody like Angelo Di Carlo, who, you know, essentially he's looking to co-promote this event with, but Matchroom's taking the lead. Because I think if he doesn't do that, he'll get railroaded in this country, just because he doesn't have the team on the ground really to build and protect whatever assets he's going to be putting out there. But like I said, it's exciting because, you know, years ago, Australians weren't getting a shot. You know, like we would be seen on the world stage and people would just know our fighters for being incredibly tough. But, you know, even if you go back to the early 90s, if an Australian fighter, say like a Justin Fortune or someone like that, got a 6 or an 8 round fight on ESPN, it was a big deal. Whereas now it's an expectation out of this country that our prospects coming through are going to be able to take it to the world. So this is another great development for the sport. We'll see how it goes. I hope that the event's a success. It's going to have a lot of challenges, but like I said, at least they're launching with the right kind of fight to build some interest.
Oh, for sure. Well, let's have a quick look at what Alfie Di Carlo had to say, because I just get the impression there's a little bit of angst there.
I understand Liam's got a target on his back at number one. Don't get me wrong. You know, it makes sense that people are looking for to shortcut their career, because we've invested a lot of time. Liam's had some great performances against international opposition and world-rated fighters to get to where he is. But everyone's just looking for a shortcut, and that's what I see that as, looking for a shortcut to the top. Now, yes, there is a big history between our families, and yes, I have taken that personally because I didn't chase this fight. But look, at the end of the day, business is business. He'll be 100% ready for this fight, and he's going to make the statement.
So, do you agree that he doesn't look overly impressed that he's been into the not forced into the fight, but I think he's been strongly advised with the fight. Now, obviously, you get the impression that Eddie's come in and said, "Look, I need a big fight to launch into Australia, and this is the fight we're after." Do you get that impression that Alfie's almost taking one for the team here?
I'll just say this for the record. Eddie is so charming that people don't see how he finesses things. So maybe Jeff Fenech said everything that Eddie suggested, but it was caressed to Fenech in a different way. So it's just been contorted. I remember one athlete who I represent still, so I'm not going to sell out who it was, saying to me that Eddie comes out and always speaks the truth at his press conferences or about negotiations, but they're missing context. And I think that a little bit of that, maybe the delivery was different from Eddie in negotiations because he knew he needed this kind of fight. And the only way that he could secure it was if he helped to enhance a bit of the needle between the two teams. I like it. I mean, I think it's great. I don't want to go to look, if there's a genuine beef, there's a genuine beef. You can see Alfie DiCarlo, to me, I know Alfie very well, very cerebral thinker, outstanding trainer. He's one of my favorite trainers in the sport out here. He knows his stuff. Liam's going to have a great game plan, but it's very rare that I hear Alfie DiCarlo that fired up. And trust me, that's Alfie fired up. He might not sound it completely. You picked up and he said there's a bit of angst there. I hear a bit of bitterness in his voice. I don't know if it's at the situation, at Jeff, at just what's happening at Eddie. I don't know. But I can tell you one thing, it's going to ensure that there's some really, really fun press materials and lead into this fight. I think I'm excited for that component of it almost as much as a fight.
Yeah, you can just tell he's not happy. But anyway, let's actually, before we move on to the next topic, I want to get your points. Talking point number 2, and you did touch on it just a little bit before. Is Australia too small for the matchroom model?
It's too small for them coming all out with their team and outlaying the kind of funds that they have to expand in different territories, like in the United States and places of that nature. The other thing is too, I think if we're a chance to thrive, they've got to look at what kind of schedule is realistic. Australia's not like the US. You can't turn around and do that flight comfortably from the UK like our Hern come. Time zones are different. Marketing, branding's different. I think if they try to operate more than 3 to 4 shows out here a year, they'll fail. I think they've got to run their shows like that, make them count. If they want to build some feeder promotions, maybe 4, 6 feeder promotions, and then do 2 bigger shows a year, that might be doable. But Australia's a tough market. You know, some of the heaviest hitters in the world have tried to take it on here and fallen face first. So, you know, with the exception really of the UFC, who has such a strong global brand, and you look at the push they've had with Aussies, you know, like Alex Volkanovski, with Robbie Whittaker being world champions. But in boxing, usually the global promoters don't last long here. So it's going to be a tough challenge. I don't know if Australia's too small, but it's very, very choppy waters to navigate. So it's just whether Eddie and his team have the time to navigate those waters.
Yeah. So do you think, you did touch on it again before, do you think he would then, or Matchroom would align themselves with someone like Ace Boxing and get them to do all
They should.
Do all the groundwork in Australia? Because let's face it, I mean, England's a long way from Australia, of course, to bring a team out, and you know, obviously you've got to negotiate with venues and the TV, and so much goes into a big event. So do you think that's what they would maybe do, is get, as I said, on board with an Ace Boxing, let them do all the groundwork, and then just come over and lay the model over the top of it?
Yeah, and I think then just build towards like 2 bigger cards a year where maybe they put their full muscle behind it, but they've got to get the events to that kind of place. And who knows? I mean, the way the sport's growing out here right now, that might be just around the corner for them to, you know, Paro comes through this fight, he might get the call for a world title next up. So then they can take that kind of risk. You know, maybe there might be something interesting that presents. You know, you never know. You never know what's around the corner with these fights. But I definitely think that they need to rely on people on the ground within Australia if they're trying to bring their team over from the UK or the US or wherever, because they got two different teams. They've got a set ground team in the US, and then they've got their main office in the UK. When you're trying to run the schedule that they do, say 30, 40 shows a year in the UK, 10 a year in the US, and then other random countries, you start to burn your team out. And when you're looking at your resources and your outgoings, and you're losing money to build what might be a smaller territory like Australia, that can get you disheartened. So that's why I'm just hopeful this first event's successful, and then they make some adjustments and follow the guidance of people like Angelo who know the market inside out.
Yeah, no, you're right. And just quickly, I think I did wonder why Liam Paro would be taking the risk with Brock Jarvis. It's been obvious in the last few days because Josh Taylor, of course, saying I'm not going anywhere. I want to keep my title, so probably makes sense to have a fight like this in the meantime. Another one happening that's just been announced today is the Tszyu versus Horn little brother version. Nikita will face Ben Horn on July 20 in Sydney at the Horton Pavilion. What are your first thoughts on this? I mean, there's probably not a lot to talk about it, but are you surprised that Ben Horn took it, or is he just the last one standing?
No, Ben Horn's from a camp that, if they're available and they get a call, they're going to take the fights. So, it doesn't surprise me, and you can't begrudge him for taking this because it's visibility on TV, and he hasn't had, like in terms of him having promotions based around him actually being promoted and seen and having that visibility, he hasn't had that a lot in his career. So good on him for taking it. Not every fighter's going to aspire or get to a point where they're going to win a world championship or fight for a world championship, and I think he's one of them. So he's just an honest fighter doing his absolute best. With that said, to me, I think this fight would have been more intriguing if Ben Horn was Nikita Tszyu and Nikita Tszyu was Ben Horn, because then you're building to he's going to avenge it for the brother. Whereas when I look at the equation for this fight, this is like a 90-10 fight in Nikita's favour. Yeah. So it's like we already seen Tim march through Jeff Horn. It might not have been the best version of Jeff Horn, but nevertheless, Tim marched through him. And I think we're going to see Nikita do the same to his poor younger... Is he younger? I think Ben's younger than... Yeah, he's younger than Jeff. Yeah, his poor younger brother. But look, I've seen some criticism of this bout on social media, and I understand it because, again, back to what I was saying, the visibility. Nikita's been promoted in headline spots, but you got to put it in context. They're trying to build a brand. The kid can secure a Fox date, which feeds... If there's 7 fights on the undercard, it feeds another 14 people. He's only 2-0. For a kid who's 2-0, this is a perfectly reasonable fight. So I just hope it goes rounds. I mean, Ben Horn just went 10 rounds with Ben Kite for the national title at 147, but Ben Kite's not a puncher. So I hope it goes rounds because I want to see how Nikita paces himself and deals with different kind of challenges. But, so far in his 2 fights, I mean, first fight he looked a little bit overzealous, trying to execute with every punch. Second fight, Mason Smith, it only went a couple minutes, but I liked his composure. I thought that you could see that maybe it was just a little bit of nerves on debut and over-eagerness. And the other thing with Nikita too that I love, the Undertaker music for the walkout. It's so different, you see fighters with... Oh, he's all business, don't come to mess around. Like I said to you, I mean, just because I see it with so many people in the sport, and maybe some people listening to this will be shocked in how I'm commentating, but just because I manage fighters and I work for a certain company and other people aren't aligned with me, I'm not going to go out of my way to cut them down. It's not my style. I'm going to look at it first and foremost from a fan's perspective. From a fan's perspective, if you're looking at this and thinking, oh, wow, Nikita Tszyu's a gun, this, maybe a bit disappointed. I look at it as a kid who's 2-0. Perfect fight for a kid 2-0.
Yeah, I think you're right. I totally agree with you, mate. I think people sort of get lost that the kid's 2-0. Before that, he'd been out of the ring for 8 years. So you got to give the guy a break. And there's not a lot, like there's a lineup of people willing to fight him. Of course, they've all been vocal on social media and everything else, or on other interviews, but for whatever reasons haven't taken the fight. But I think I think actually No Limit and Fox Sports would probably be actually rubbing their hands together saying, how good's this? We've actually got Tszyu versus Horn. I know it's not the previous one, but Ben Horn as an opponent, I think it's a great fight as far as appeal to the general public out there, but also just a good solid fight for Nikita. I just hope that Ben learns from the Mason Smiths of the world and doesn't come out and try and punch with Nikita. I hope he just takes his time, and I think he will. I think Glenn Rushton will know enough to prime him up to go out there and try and get through that first 2 or 3 rounds and see what Nikita's got. And I think Nikita's camp would also approve of that, to actually give him 3, 4, 5, even hopefully 6 rounds. So I don't think it's a bad fight. Do I think that Ben Horn on paper looks like he's overmatched? He does. But Ben's had a few fights now. He's durable. He's tough. He's from a good pedigree. So I actually think it's not a bad fight. So I think I'm with you. All those social media people, just maybe do your research and have a good look at it before you comment. Let's just have a quick look at the video here, mate. This is both boys, what they had to say.
The way I look back at it is I've got to get one back up on the family name. Timmy's over here. He's taken that. We're 1 down. So let's try and make it 1-1.
Well, I guess you can appreciate the feelings that Ben Horn would have about watching it the other way around and the motivation it would give him.
Yeah, well, he's here to avenge the loss and make it 1-1 for our family rivalry, but I'm here to make it 2-0.
How does?
Yeah, I think everyone will try and talk it up as the revenge fight or the rivalry or whatever. I don't think Nikita Tszyu really gives a toss about any rivalry or one-upmanship, does he? He just wants to get in there and punch on.
Yeah, and I don't, and even from the Horn's perspective, I mean, you know Jeff Horn yourself. Jeff Horn is one of the nicest kids you ever meet in boxing. So I don't think him and Tim were ever rivals in any kind of way either.
No, exactly. And the 2 of the combatants that were in that, or the behind the scenes of that first fight, was of course Glenn Jennings and Glenn Rushton. Let's have a quick listen to what they have to say. Firstly, Glenn Jennings.
Already out in front of him after 2 rounds, believe it or not, and as a pro. Plenty of them have called him out, and so when the phone call comes, those same people tend to disappear. And it's quite frustrating. I mean, I always thought that the call-out fighters were the tough guys that actually wanted to fight. It seems to me nowadays that the call-out fighters are the opposite. They like to call out, they like to make noise, and when the phone call comes in, let's do it, it's crickets. There's nothing.
Fight here. People don't realise how good a fight this is going to be. But one thing I'll say about Ben, as I said, ticker, it's all there, probably more ticker than Big Ben, So he's going to come here to fight. It's going to be a terrific fight. And certainly, as I said, we've got incredible respect for Nikita, his trainers, his manager, Glenn Jennings, and the whole No Limit team. But as I said, this is a fight. And as Glenn said, we never come to a fight we don't expect to win. So we're not coming down here to make up the numbers. We're coming here to win the fight, and we just can't wait to 20th of July. It's going to be an awesome fight.
Yeah, so you can see a little bit of frustration there from Glenn Jennings. Probably, I think they've obviously had a few opponents that have fallen over, whatever. But one thing, I mean, Glenn Rushton cops it a fair bit as well. But one thing I like about him, he doesn't mind talking it up, and he makes some outrageous statements and stuff. But I think guys like him are great for the sport, aren't they?
I mean, what's a sport without characters? What's a sport with everyone that just says, yeah, we're going to come there, we're going to do our best, we take it 1 week at a time. We're going to, it's boring.
Yeah, agree.
It's boring, it's cookie cutter. So I like Glenn in that he's a character. And look, people can have their perspectives on him. I know I've had mine at times. End of the day, he's a guy that had a kid, a future aspiring school teacher, walk into his gym who was being bullied, who started learning karate, and within basically a 3-year period, nursed that kid to make the final 8 in Olympic Games, and within 3 years of that period become a world champion, and that's Jeff Horn. So whether you agree with Glenn's perspectives or not, whether you respect him as a coach or not, what he accomplished with Jeff Horn, very, very few people in this lifetime ever will. So you have to respect him for that.
No, 100%, mate. Well said. I was just going to say the same thing. He has copped a lot, but geez, you can't deny what he's done with what he did with Jeff Horn. It was just amazing what he got up to. Let's get one more thing on the Aussie scene before we move on, just to a couple of world things to finish off. I want to get your view on this. It's the Australian top 10. Now, I've just done it myself. I just I don't expect you to agree with it or whatever. I just want your views on it. So I've changed it a little bit since last time. I think the top 5 speak for themselves. I've kept George Kambosos at number 1 because I just don't think Tim, he was number 2. I just don't think you can just inherit it just because George lost his title. I know you might see it differently. I think if obviously Tim wins, he'll be number 1, but I just didn't want to just put Tim in there. But I think it'd be unfair to George for what he's achieved to drop him back. But anyway, you might have a different opinion. I've actually put Justice Haney at number 9. Now, I want your opinion on it. I know he's only had 6 fights. Out of that top 10, what would you order would you change, and who would you take out, and who would you put in?
I think the top 7 are pretty solid. I'm just trying to think who else potentially would be put in. I mean, the thing is, I talk about top 10 and pound for pound list all the time. It really is perspective, and there's different flavors of ice cream that different people like. I'm going to vouch for one of my guys and say, if you've got Dempsey and you've got Haney there, I think that someone like Mateo Tapia deserves to be in consideration for these lists.
Yep.
But in terms of achievement, you can't fault it. I think even though Shannon, like we just said, there's 2 other women's world champions within Australia, but Shannon's the most accomplished and she's on the best run. So she deserves to be at number 8. Justice had a terrific win with Goodall. So again, I know Angelo Di Carlo would dispute whether it should be Justice or Dempsey or whoever. I think they're both borderline anyways, just because they're still on the way up. And this is the interesting part here is I think, like you said, I think the top 4 is rock solid. In terms of those guys, you can't dispute or shift any of them. Opetai should be there because he maybe hasn't fought guys at the level that the top 4 have, but he's handled everyone with ease, and he's getting the biggest opportunity he's had. Paro's beaten better opposition than Jai, but Jai's beaten his opposition with more style. So just a bit more style, So that's kind of a flip of the coin, but you probably go Jai's way. Zarafa's been, hot and cold at stages, but on the virtue of knocking out Isaac Hardman, on the virtue of performing exceptionally well when he has had step-up opportunities, deserve it there. Shannon, we covered. The other 2, like I said, I'll vouch for a few of my guys, but I can't really knock the list.
Yeah, there's guys like, I suppose, there's maybe even a Brock Jarvis. I didn't think so because he hasn't really had that level of opposition. There's a Liam Wilson who I think he was on the fringes and then obviously lost and now he's won again. I think guys like Sam Goodman will be pushing hard pretty soon. There's a lot of, that's what's great about the sport in Australia at the moment. But there's probably, I think I'm with you, the top 7 are probably a lock. There's probably about a dozen fighters you could throw from 7 to 15 or whatever over. What about number 1 and 2? Did you agree with keeping George at number 1, or would you put Tim at number 1?
I've just said this to a number of people in recent weeks. George Kambosos has gone from being somewhat overrated, coming off the Teofimo win, to being severely underrated by a lot of people in the sport.
Off, didn't they?
Just because he lost to a guy. I mean, Devin Haney's a top 10 pound for pound guy in the sport right now. So, Kambosos is deserved on the virtue of beating Teofimo. He's deserved, but even prior to that, on the virtue of beating guys like Lee Selby, Mickey Bay, that's at the same level as anything Tim Tszyu's accomplished. So, yeah, I think you're accurate to retain him at number 1.
You could probably juggle and whatever. I think that's a joint 3rd, to be honest. Just quickly before we move on the world scene, do you take the same thought with Canelo? Did you drop him for losing that last fight, or would you just keep him at number 1?
You got to drop him. No, you got to drop him because he only went about number 4.
Okay.
Number 4, number 5. I think you've got to have Bivol. But if you drop him, you've got to have Bivol a couple of spots behind him. And then the other conversation is, if you have Bivol, how can you not have Better Beef when he's marched through the division and Bivol hasn't, other than beating Canelo? So pound for pound lists are tricky because of that. But I think with Canelo, the way he performed the second half of the fight against Bivol, no way on earth can you have him above Errol Spence. No way you can have him above Terence Crawford. You can't have him above Inoue. That's my own personal take. Okay, I think that you got to make those adjustments.
Yeah, and there's also the argument Usyk or Fury. I know Fury's retired, but who do you have number 1?
He ain't retired.
No, I've got him in our talking point in a minute, actually, so save what you're going to say there. But so who would you have higher, Fury or Usyk?
Usyk,
would you? Fair dinkum. Okay.
He was unified world champ at cruiserweight, cleaned out the whole division, stepped up, beat Anthony Joshua.
Yep.
You got to look at Joshua on the same tier as Deontay Wilder. When you're looking at pound for pound lists, you shouldn't be looking at potential or who you think wins a fight. You got to look at accomplishment too.
I must admit, when I was thinking of Usyk, I probably just had the heavyweight version of Usyk in there and didn't actually taking his body of work at cruiserweight. And you're right, undisputed world champion. It's got to be taken into account. So no, that's it's a very good point. Actually, speaking of Canelo, let's just get into a couple of world things before we exit the episode. The venue has been announced. It is T-Mobile Arena. I think that was no surprise. Obviously, September 17 in Las Vegas. First thoughts?
This wasn't an interesting fight till Canelo performed the way he performed the last bout. And so that brings Triple G into the equation. Triple G looked a little bit vulnerable to the body. And even, his reaction time and reaction speed looked like it slowed considerably against Murata. But that said, Murata brings a different kind of physicality and crash and bash style to Canelo. Canelo is going to be more measured and pick his spots, and that might suit Golovkin a little better.
He hadn't fought for a while.
I still
either,
think, he had a layoff. He had a lengthy layoff, and I think that, and I think his timing was a little bit off early in that fight, but still physically, he just looked weathered a bit. I think that plays into the equation when you're framing the market on this, and I think that even though Canelo had what I felt was a very flat performance against Bivol, I'm not sure lightning's going to strike twice. I think that he'll bring the A version of himself, and he is going to be the physically bigger guy in this fight. So I think that plays into his hands too. Whereas with Bivol, he just couldn't muscle. Canelo just couldn't muscle him around.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people have written this fight off so quickly. I think you're just jumping the gun a little bit too quick. I think Canelo, but he didn't look great. But let's face it, he was 10 to 15 pound, probably above what he should be fighting at. So I think it was brave for him to go up initially. He obviously beat lesser opposition than Bivol. He got exposed for, obviously bit off more than he can chew. Triple G hadn't fought for a while, obviously turned 40. Hard to probably get up for the Murata fight. I think this fight here, he will be primed. This will be his last probably big fight. So I think it's going to be a lot better than what a lot of people think. And I will actually be there for that fight. I'm going to go over and cover this fight from Las Vegas.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to that. I went to the previous two as well, which were awesome. So I'm gonna finish the trilogy, and as I said, I'll be bringing all the news back to the channel and all the coverage. So that should be awesome. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a really good fight. Another one looking forward to, mate, is this one. As we mentioned before, for Usyk and Joshua. It's been confirmed for 20th of August in Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm just thinking that what was the amount of money they threw in? Was it 80 million they threw in to put the fight on?
Something like that, yeah.
Was it dollars or pounds? Whatever it might be. Whatever
USD.
American, okay. So I suppose it's always in US dollars, isn't it? But that's a massive site fee, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, why would you not go to Saudi? I know a lot of people question ethically or whatever. End of the day, they're prize fighters.
Yeah. Well, that covers the purses, doesn't it? Right there and then. The purses are covered.
Purses, undercard,
Yep.
operations of the event, everything. And then anything that comes on pay-per-view is just additional cream.
And that's the thing when you talk about pay-per-view, like, it's not a bad decision because all the 90,000 people that would have went to in England are all going to buy the fight at home on top of everyone else that's going to buy the fight. So whatever it costs over there, $50 or whatever it is. So there's just a shite load of money coming in for it.
Yeah, it'll probably generate, anywhere from $150 to $200 million total. So a lot of money in the pot. It's unbelievable what Joshua has achieved in terms of being a box office attraction in this era. So, full credit to him. You'll never see me complaining about fighters being overpaid or anything of that nature.
Yeah, no, it should be great. So you can see there, Usyk Joshua 2 in Saudi Arabia. So that should be, and just adds to the calendar for the rest of the year. It's amazing. We've had obviously the 2 years of COVID where we had nothing, and now we're just being flooded with with fights. So just while we're on the heavyweights and that, mate, I just want to go to we've got 2 talking points to go and we're finished.
Sure.
Tyson Fury is biding his time. Now, I don't think anyone actually believes he's retired. Do you think he's waiting to see if Joshua wins, he'll come back, or do you think he would actually come back and fight Usyk? Because I actually have my doubts that he would be able to get up for an Usyk. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he's waiting to see if Joshua wins. I think he'll fight. 100% he'll endeavour to make the Joshua fight. Usyk, he may, if the market's correct for it, if the purse and everything. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that fight inspires him the same way.
What sort of purses would we be looking at if he fought Joshua? Massive, wouldn't it?
100 million aside. 100 million aside. Yeah, it's insane.
It's crazy. I didn't get your tip before. Do you think that Joshua can actually get revenge, or do you think Usyk will do it again?
I want to say Joshua because I got a lot of faith in his training team. I've worked quite a bit with Robert Garcia in the past, and I know what Robert's capabilities are as a trainer, and what improvements and adjustments he can make without trying to change the fighter stylistically. And also, Angel Fernandez is a good friend of mine too, who's Joshua's assistant trainer. So I want to pick Joshua. I just struggle to see those last 4 rounds of the first fight were telling. I thought, especially the last couple where, Usyk was backing him up and Joshua couldn't find an answer to it. And maybe he just was kind of lost between styles or whatever it may be. But again, I just couldn't pick Joshua with any confidence. So my heart's with Joshua on the fight, but my head says that Usyk's going to outbox him again.
Yeah, well, let's hope. Yeah, I'm with you. I want Joshua to win just for that potential Fury fight. I think it has been massive for boxing. One last thing I want to get your opinion on, mate. It's not professional boxing. It is amateur boxing. What do you think of this one? This is just the point. Amateur boxing will die without the Olympics, because obviously they're looking to kick it out. Is there a future for amateur boxing if it's booted out of the Olympics?
There's a future only because of all these countries who predicated on funding programs for world championships and things like that, because that's how they secure budgets from governments. You think of Cuba, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Russia, Mongolia, all these places are renowned in amateur boxing, and they've got huge programs, a lot of funding, a lot of financing. They've got sports ministries involved in funding operations. So I think that irrespective of no Olympics, I think that it's going to always thrive in that respect, but it's going to die in westernized countries. Yeah. I think in places, it's already started to die in the US a bit, but it's going to really die out in places, US, Australia, places where we need to see and build towards goals like the Olympics. I think the sport will be greatly affected.
Yeah, and I think, with that not that carrot hanging over, the amateur, and I was one of them. Obviously, it's all I wanted to do was represent Australia at the Olympics and Commonwealth Games, and I was lucky enough to do that, of course. But I just think those young kids coming through, and they're all influenced by the pros out there. I think they're going to come in, they're going to have just 10, 20 fights, whatever it might be, just to get some experience. And when they're old enough, they're all just going to turn pro. And I agree with you. I just think the boxing programs of Western countries or Olympic countries are just gonna really suffer, and it's just a bit of a shame that all the kids are just going to want to turn pro.
Well, yourself, you've been to all the key tournaments around the world. If you just trained for, how many? When did you start boxing?
I was 10. Yep, I was 10.
Yep. And how old were you when you made it to the Olympics?
I made the Olympics.
Mid-20s.
Just turned 23. I actually had my 23rd birthday in camp for the Olympics, and I was just turned 25 for the Commonwealth Games. But for me, pros were a distant second.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to do, and if that wasn't there, I'm just not sure where I would have headed, to be honest.
And that's what I mean. Like as a 10-year-old, you might want to learn boxing or whatever, but when you get to 15, 16, you're not thinking, I want to be world amateur champion. People want to be world amateur champion so that they can build towards then what the next goal is, which is to become Olympic champion.
Yep.
I just feel like if you're a kid coming through and you win a national title and you've got a good offer to turn pro and you've only got Commonwealth Games or World Championships ahead of you, you're going to be swayed. Whereas I think the Olympics keeps kind of kids in and build towards those goals.
It does, mate, exactly. And I was just going to say that, just because when you're 10 or 11 years old, of course, you want to take on the world. I wanted to be heavyweight champion of the world and all that sort of stuff. But as you go through the teens, let's face it, puberty sets in, other interests come in. You're looking at girls and all that sort of stuff. And then you get even older, you're looking at, then you're able to drink and go out. The one thing that kept me coming back and, refocusing was the fact that the Olympic Games were there, and that was my goal. That was all I wanted to do, and that's what kept me going. I'm not quite sure if it wasn't there that I would have actually stayed in boxing or been involved in boxing. And I know I'm not the only one out there. And it just keeps that goal out there to get to. And I would just hate to say. I understand, by the way, why they're looking to boot it out, because it's all the corrupt pricks over the years that have just taken more than they've given. This is where Tszyu would come in, of course, is where he'd go nuts. But I just think if it come to that, I'd be really, as an Olympian myself, and I'm probably speaking for the Justin Crawfords and Robbie Pedens and Hussey Hussains and all those Olympians of the past, just how disappointing it would be to not have that thrill and privilege to represent your country at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said here, I just think without those kind of goals in a kid's career, they might just be lost to the sport. It might not even be their loss to the pros. They'll just be lost to the sport,
I would
period.
think lost to the sport, because not everyone wants to turn pro. I mean, it was sort of, okay, I'd love to turn pro one day, but for me, it was about the Olympics. And I just think, because let's face it, when you're a kid, it's you still view it as a sport almost. It is a sport. It's boxing, but you still see it as a sport, and and even more telling is that your parents probably see it more of a sport. When you turn pro, mate, you know better than anyone. It is a cutthroat, no prisoner taking business.
It's a different business.
It is, and it's not a good business sometimes. I mean, you've been in a lot longer than what I have, and my small taste in it, I almost wish I hadn't have stepped foot into the business side of it and just loved it as a fan and obviously as a boxer. But anyway, hope we're wrong, and they keep it in the Olympics. It's still there for future generations. But, mate, what I'm going to do, we're going to leave it at that. I would just like to really thank you, and I'm sure all our viewers and those that are listening on Spotify will also agree, mate. What an absolute privilege it was to have you on, mate. Your insight and knowledge and view of everything was awesome, mate, and I'd love to have you on whenever you're available to come on.
It's a pleasure. I heard that Tszyu was ducking me in the quiz, and that's why he wasn't on tonight.
When I said you were going to be on and you might be on for the quiz, he ran for the hills. No, I think he'd back himself. But no, mate, as I said, it was great to have you on. I'm
definitely.
I hope you got a lot out of it as well. I'm sure everyone watching and listening did, and can't wait to have you on again. So don't make it a once in a while thing. Let's make it a bit of a habit and get you on more often when able.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you,
Talk to
brother.
next time, mate.